Okay, if you'd head to, I don't know what slide it is, the first slide in the Bible study. Is that the first one? Okay, good. I taught this a week ago, so we'll see what happens here. It kind of setting the stage of what's going on, we shift from chapter 4 into chapter 5. And I don't know about you, but as I started reading in chapter 4, I was like, wait a second, did I miss something? And the answer is, you missed a whole lot. There's just a whole section of history that's not recorded in the book of Daniel. Because the king that we were just talking about was Nebuchadnezzar II, and all of a sudden we're talking about Belshazzar, not to be confused with Belteshazzar, which is the name for Daniel. Belshazzar is, I'm going to say, kind of the king of Babylon. And the reason I say that is I'm going to try to fill in the historical gap for you. So you're going to leave tonight knowing way more about Babylonian history than you probably really wanted to know coming in to the Bible study tonight. So Nebuchadnezzar died, they believe, around 562 BC, and there's a whole succession of power struggles following Nebuchadnezzar II's death. And some of them are kids who serve as, one of them is a kid who serves as king only for probably months. I don't even know if it would be a year, and mysteriously died. Makes you wonder, right? So, a king that ruled for a while that isn't even talked about in Daniel is this guy Nabonidus. And he ruled from 556 to 539 BC. And while his reign is going on, if you can call it a reign, it's just really weird. Persia is growing in power. And Cyrus is the leader of Persia. Go on to the next slide. So here's a map of what's going on. The Persian Empire is in that light green. Babylonian Empire is that semicircle in kind of a reddish brown. And there's a city called Opus that is really, really important to understand the history of what's going on, especially with Nabonidus and with Belshazzar. Because in 539, Persian forces come and they invade and they hit Opus along the Tigris River. And a week later, they enter Babylon without a shot being fired. It's like the gates just open up and the Persians walk in. I mean, bizarre. I mean, just really bizarre. So, having been defeated in the field, Nabonidus retreats. He takes off. Most scholars believe he was probably captured at some point and ends up being sequestered deep within the Persian Empire. And the defense is left to his son Belshazzar, which you got to make note of because Belshazzar numerous times is referred to as the son of Nebuchadnezzar, but he's not the son of Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar is like his father, like George Washington is my father. Okay? He's my founding father, and he's your founding father, but he's not really my father. But we're connected in kind of a weird way. So Belshazzar, I can't find, well, it might loosely, possibly, be a grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, but that's totally speculation, not really verifiable. So here they talk about the son of Nebuchadnezzar, probably means Semitic, a descendant or a successor of the throne or something like that. So I can live with that. Go on to the next slide. So here's what we hear in verse 1. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Now, you might read this and go, so why is this the first thing we hear about Belshazzar, right? Why didn't we hear anything about Nabonidus? Why is a feast the big thing? I believe the feast plays a major role in some of the history that we're going to talk about. I had Neil Carlson posted me a question that I had to think about, but I'm not going to answer your question right now, Neil, because it has nothing to do with Daniel, but it's a very important question. So he gave me his phone number to give him a call. So aren't you glad that you know all that, right? And by the way, Neil, thanks for joining us tonight. So we've got this major party. Now listen to what he does. This shows you the character of this guy. Go to the next slide. Oh, it doesn't tell you. Okay. I have no idea what comes next, so I'm just guessing here. So the abrupt beginning of chapter 5, remember I said chapter 4, we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar II, all of a sudden, bam, you got a different king. And he's like 2 kings later, maybe even 3 kings later, creates a gap between itself, preceding chapter. At the end of chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar, humbled and aware of the source of his sovereignty in the Most High God, had been restored to his kingdom. Well, that's the most charitable thing you could say about Nebuchadnezzar. He said the right words. I don't think it was in his heart. But anyway, that's a whole nother sermon. Next slide. Now it appears he's dead. I think that's a safe assumption. And that another king rules in his place, one who in the course of the narrative is identified as his son, but is not his son. Next slide. So, verse 2, Belshazzar, when tasted the wine, commanded, listen to this, the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. I want you to see what they were probably drinking from. Next slide. I mean, these aren't little tiny Dixie cups. These are bowls of wine, okay? Now, the other thing is, remember we talked about the vessels being taken out of the temple, and we were identifying, those weren't the only things that were taken. So there was all kinds of implements that were taken. And they must have had a warehouse on the Temple Mount for the amount of stuff that was taken. And I'll get there in a second. So the next slide. Then they brought in the golden vessels. This is almost a repeat that had been taken out of the temple. So these are sacred, holy instruments, objects taken out of the temple in Jerusalem. And remember, Nebuchadnezzar put them in the treasury of the temple. So they were kind of respected as holy by Nebuchadnezzar. Belshazzar does not have the same attitude. In the house of God in Jerusalem, next, go back. And the king, his lords, his wives, concubines drank wine, praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So they're drinking out of the holy vessels out of the temple in Jerusalem, all the while they're praising these idol gods in Babylon. Go ahead, next slide. The cups used at royal banquets are particularly important vehicles for kings' display of wealth and power. So he's showing off to all these lords and nobles and wives and concubines. Particularly known for their love of golden vessels. Belshazzar, or the Persians were, Belshazzar tries to impress his guests, display his prowess by arranging for a unique set of drinking vessels to be used, the sacred vessels from the temple in Jerusalem. Next slide. Part of the contrast between Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar is seen in their different treatment of the temple vessels. Back in chapter 1, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his power, along with some of the vessels of the house of the Lord, and this king of Babylon treated them respectfully, placing them in the treasury of the temple of his God, who is Nebu. Next slide. Though he sees himself as exerting power over them, Nebuchadnezzar does not subject them to dishonor. Belshazzar, however, treats them like royal tableware. I would say he treats them like red plastic cups from Walmart. That's what he's treating them as. A blasphemous gesture. Because the Judean religion did not have a cult statue of Yahweh. The vowels are not there, that's why they write it that way. Temple vessels played a particular and important role in metonymy. Metonymically, I can't pronounce that. Basically what it means is they represent the presence of a deity, or they represent the presence of something. So you look at these vessels and you go, oh, these are from the temple in Jerusalem. Oh yeah, their God is Yahweh. You're about to say something.
Couple things here.
Yep.
Belshazzar, I believe we just said, praise the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron. Kind of sounds like the statue.
Yeah, it's a whole lot like the statue. Same metals used. Yeah, good catch.
In that order. And then the next question I have, it referred to Nebuchadnezzar as Belshazzar's father. How does the Hebrew handle that word?
It uses the word, whatever the Aramaic word is.
Okay.
In Hebrew, it would have been Ben,
Okay,
but I
so
don't know what it would be in
actually
Aramaic.
Father, because I know, for instance, I'm a Jane Austen fan, so everybody you're related to is your cousin, even though they might not be what we know to be first cousins.
Right, yep.
Just their lingo.
Yep. Yeah, it's the word father used there, so we can't dance around it. But it's not his father. That much I can nail down. Next slide. Like the peoples themselves, they were taken into exile, then returned to Jerusalem by the command of Cyrus the Persian. So I'm going to share with you this Isaiah, or this Ezra passage. Go to the Ezra slide. This is what it says. Cyrus the king also brought out the vessels. So this is Cyrus the Persian after Babylon has fallen. So he takes the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed them in the house of his gods. So they're not in the temple, they're in the royal banquet area. Cyrus, king of Persia, brought these out in the charge of Mithridates, the treasurer, who counted them out to Shabazar, the prince of Judah. Go on. And this was the number of them. This is why I said they had to have a warehouse on the tent. Listen to all this. 30 basins of gold, 1,000 basins of silver. Remember, these are big things. 29 censers, probably didn't use the censers to drink out of, but you know, when people get drunk, they'll probably drink out of anything. So 30 bowls of gold, 410 bowls of silver, 1,000 other vessels. All the vessels of gold and silver were 5,400 vessels. That's a lot of vessels, especially if they're the size of what that was pictured there. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up when the exiles were brought up from Babylonia to Jerusalem? Well, Sheshbazzar didn't do that. Nebuchadnezzar did, but Sheshbazzar, or we pronounce it in Daniel, he was the one who corrupted those very things. Go on to commentary. Isaiah 52:11 depicts the exiles as purifying themselves in order to carry the sacred vessels back to Jerusalem. So you didn't just load them up, put them in a plastic tub from Walmart. You had to ceremonial clean yourself because they were held in such high regard as being a part of the holy place where the Lord was. So this is what Isaiah 52 says. Next slide. Depart, depart, go out from there. In other words, Babylon. Touch no unclean thing. Go out from the midst of her, Babylon. Purify yourselves, you who bear the vessels of the Lord. So then, while this drunken party is going on, the vessels of the Lord are being used by like red plastic cups from Walmart. This happens. Next slide. He sees a hand writing on the wall. By the way, that's where we get our expression. The handwriting is on the wall, which means what? It's all over. It's done. The handwriting's on, nothing's going to change. It's going to happen. So this is what was written on the wall. And it's written in Aramaic. Remember, that's the language of the Babylonians. So they saw the words, they knew the words, they could translate the words. His intellectual crowd just can't figure out what they mean. And it says, Mene, Mene, Tophel, Va, Porsin. Go on to the next slide. So the king, he sees this, okay? So they see the fingers of a human hand appear and write on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. I like that addition, which means it was lit up. It wasn't hidden. And the king saw the hand as it wrote, so he's seeing it happen right before him. Then the king's color changed. What color do you think the king became? Probably white as a sheet, right? Well, it gets even better. And his thoughts alarmed him. He's like, what is going on the wall? His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. In other words, Belshazzar is about to faint. I mean, that's what's going on. Next slide. The king called out loudly to bring the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing, shows me its interpretation, shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. I read the third ruler in the kingdom, and I was like, what an odd thing to say. Why when Joseph interpreted dreams in Egypt, he was number 2, right behind Pharaoh. Why 3? There's a very important reason. And it's because Belshazzar is not the king. He is a king regent, or a substitute, or an interim king. Kind of like, a governor that's put in place, but he's not been elected to that, okay? So he's holding the position because Nabonidus is not dead. Nabonidus is the king. He's number 1. Belshazzar is 2, and so he says, we'll make you 3, whoever you are, okay? Go on to the next slide. When all the king's wise men came in, they couldn't read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. They could read it. They knew what the word said. King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed. So he got even whiter than he was white before, okay? So now he's really, really white. I mean, he's really having a hard time. And his lords were absolutely perplexed. Next slide. The queen is not named, which is so helpful, right? So the queen, so who is it? Is it Belshazzar's wife? I highly doubt it. Is it Nabonidus' wife? I highly doubt it, because Nabonidus isn't anywhere around. And so if he's not anywhere around, I have a feeling his queen would have gone with him. I think it is the queen mother. In other words, the wife of Nebuchadnezzar II, because of what she says. The queen comes in, because of the words of the king and his lords, comes in the banquet hall. So she hasn't been there. She's not partying with these dudes, okay? I think she finds this whole thing repulsive. The queen comes in and declares, "O king, live forever." I think she's got her tongue firmly planted in her cheek and probably rolling her eyes, but she says what you're supposed to say. "Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change." In other words, you are just a weak little, I can't believe that you're sitting here in my husband's chair. I mean, I think that's what's going on. Next one. So the queen, commentators say uncertain whether she's a grandmother, queen mother, but she remembers Daniel. And everything we know in the book of Daniel is that Daniel was relating to Nebuchadnezzar II. She speaks highly of Daniel, as Nebuchadnezzar had done. In the time of your father, this is what we're going to hear in the next verse, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. She quickly reminds him of Daniel's ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. So verse 11 that I just read, go ahead, the next slide. "There's a man in your kingdom, whom spirit of the holy gods," so she missed that one, because Daniel's very clear, I just got one God, and that's Yahweh. But the Babylonians are always like, yeah, well, whatever, but we would just lump him in with all the other gods. "In the days of your father," okay, not his father, at best his grandfather, biologically, because possibly Nabonidus married one of Nebuchadnezzar's 4 daughters. Possibly. There's really no record that verifies it. Like the wisdom of the gods, you're found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, not his father, your father the king, not your father, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers. So evidently Daniel's not in that position anymore. Or Belshazzar would know this, but he doesn't. So because of an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, solve problems, were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, not Belshazzar. Now Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Next verse. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. King answered and said to Daniel, you are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king, my father, not your father, brought from Judah. I just have to throw that in because it really ticks me off. But anyway, I have heard of you, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that the light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Next verse. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing, make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I've heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Next verse. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom. How do you think Daniel responds? Joseph took that position. Listen to what Daniel does. Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself and give your reward to others. In other words, I don't want it. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. Now, I got to ask, why do you think Daniel refused? Yeah.
My initial thought, I had a feeling you were going to ask that question. Pharaoh wasn't as much getting in Joseph's business with how he worshiped.
Okay.
This guy would be.
Okay. So he refuses because of who Belshazzar is. Anyone else? I've got my theory. Yeah. He doesn't want to. I think you're correct, but there's a reason he doesn't want to. Yeah. He doesn't want what? Doesn't want any more kings? Well, he's going to have kings the rest of his life till he's in his 80s. Yep. Great theological answer. To God be the glory. I think all of these answers could be, but here's mine. I'm so much more basic and pragmatic. You remember the Battle of Opus on the Tigris River that Nabonidus came to fight? This is what I think's going on. I think that battle is going on right now. And I think a party is happening down in Babylon. Belshazzar is not at the battle. Nabonidus gets his hind end kicked and flees. Persia has been influencing all kinds of pressure on Babylon, and I think Daniel is thinking, the last thing I want to be is third in line when this house of cards comes crashing down. Thank you, but no thank you. Give it to somebody else. A party going on, and remember, the Persians walk through the gates of Babylon. Nobody puts up a fight. Why? Because all the commanders, all the leaders, they're drinking wine out of all the big basins from the temple in Jerusalem. That's what I think's going on. Next slide. O King, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. In other words, it was Yahweh that did this. Next. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed. Whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up. And whom he would, he humbled. This is the Lord doing this stuff, right? Next, but when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne and his glory was taken from him. He was on all fours eating grass like a cow. Boanthropy, right? Next. He was driven from among the children of mankind. His mind was made like that of a beast. We're talking about Nebuchadnezzar II. And his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He fell like grass, like an oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, because he slept outside until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom his will. Now just think, Daniel is saying all this stuff with wine still flowing out of Belshazzar's beard from drinking out of the vessels from the holy place of Yahweh in Jerusalem. Do you think Daniel's trying to stick it to him? I think Daniel is ticked off tremendously as he's saying these words. Next. And you, his son, not his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart. Pretty clear. I just look around at this demonstration of red plastic cups from Walmart that came out of the temple in Jerusalem. But you've lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. And the vessels of his house have been brought in before you. You, your lords, your wives, your concubines, you've drunk wine from them. Next. You've praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze and iron and wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. So you've been worshiping all these idols that you've made with your own hands, but the one who gives you the very breath you breathe in, you've been treating him in total dishonor and disrespect. Next. And from his presence, the hand was sent, and the writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed, many, many tekel parsin. Those are all Aramaic words. Next. This is the interpretation of the matter. These are all measurements, by the way. Many. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Many, many. It's emphasized. Tekel. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So, commentary. Daniel turned to the cryptic message, read many, many tekel parsin. He interpreted the message as being an ominous warning of impending judgment on Belshazzar's kingdom. Many, meaning mina, 50 shekels, sounds like a related word meaning numbered. Belshazzar's days were numbered, and his reign about to come to an end. In similar fashion, tekel means shekel. It was a play on a related word meaning weighed. The shekel is the weight. Belshazzar had been weighed like a shekel on the scales of divine justice and had been found lacking. So when you would go into a marketplace and you'd bring in a shekel, the marketplace guy would go, okay, thank you for the shekel. He'd put it on his scale, and he'd have a counterweight. He knew how much silver needed to be in that shekel. And if it was light, it was like, I need a little bit more. If it was heavy, it was like, thank you very much. I don't know. Yeah. Next, parsin, meaning half shekel. 528 singular from Perez used, was taken as a play on a related word meaning divided. Furthermore, it sounds like Persian. Belshazzar's kingdom would be divided between the Medes and the Persians. The prophecy of Belshazzar's demise was fulfilled that very night. And we'll get to verse 30. This is from the English Standard Version Study Bible. Daniel read the interpretation of the writing, many, many tekel parsin. The words are clearly Aramaic, form a sequence of weights, decreasing from a mina to a shekel, which is 1/60th of a mina, to half a shekel. It was not that the king and the wise men couldn't read these words, they just failed to understand the significance for Belshazzar. So it was a puzzle, it was a cipher to figure out. Go on. Read as verbs with different vowels attached to the Aramaic consonants, the sequence becomes numbered, weighed, divided. The Lord had numbered the days of Belshazzar's kingdom, brought it to an end because he had been weighed in the balance, found wanting. The repetition of numbered may suggest that it's going to happen and happen fast. And oh boy, does it. Verse 29. Then Belshazzar gave the command. Daniel was clothed with purple, a chain of gold was put around his neck. Proclamation was made about him that he should be third ruler in the kingdom. He already said, I don't want it. They put it on him anyway. I can see Daniel bow, walk around the corner, take it off, push it, into some hole somewhere, and get out of there lickety-split. That very night, Belshazzar and the Chaldean king was killed. Not that he died, he was killed. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom being about 62 years old. So let's take a look at some histories. This is from a Presbyterian commentary by Carol Newsom. 5 ancient sources refer to the events of the fall of Babylon in 539 BC. Babylonian Chronicle, most trustworthy. Cyrus Cylinder, propagandist document. Who do you think it holds up? Cyrus. Makes Cyrus look really good. The winner always gets to write the history, remember? Number 3 and 4 accounts of the Greek historians Herodotus and Xenophon, and 5 the account of Bellerosus, a Hellenistic era, so he was much later, Babylonian historian who's quoted by Josephus a lot. In addition, numerous cuneiform documents make the reference of Belshazzar. None of these documents should be used to reconstruct historical events without attention to their own purposes and biases, of course. In other words, fake news back then. Huh? Nothing new under the sun. Everybody's got their own bias that they put in here. Belshazzar was the son of the last king of Babylon, Nabonidus, not related to Nebuchadnezzar. I would argue possibly related to Nebuchadnezzar. Although never holding the status of king, Belshazzar served as sub-regent for Nabonidus during the 10 years that Nabonidus was in residence at Tamia in Arabia. So who in the world is Nabonidus, since he's never mentioned in Daniel? Well, Nabonidus didn't have any royalty connected with him. Subsequently, what claim he had to the throne remains unclear, given that Nabonidus made no genealogical claims of kinship to previous kings. So I would argue that he needs a queen. So it makes all kinds of sense to me that the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar is what gave Nabonidus his status of royalty. This suggests he was neither related nor connected to the Chaldean dynasty of Babylonian rulers. However, he's known to have had a prominent career of some time before he became king, whether that's militarily or economically. Next one. Possibly he was connected to the Chaldean kings via marriage, possibly having married a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar II. He had 4 daughters, but there's no historical linking of them. But to me, it makes all kinds of sense that that's probably what is going on here. Nabonidus was, to his own apparent surprise, proclaimed king after the disposition and murder of Labashi Marduk in a plot likely led by Nabonidus' son, Belshazzar. So this scoundrel who, he couldn't have been very old when this happened, like maybe late teens at best, and he's killing possibly a cousin who would have been maybe elementary school age, maybe middle school age. He kills him. So most scholars say, yeah, we think it was Belshazzar, who either ordered it or did it himself. So Labash Marduk, son of the heir of Nergalesar, the 4th king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So, it's just a mess. That's all I can say. Labash Marduk's mother was a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar II, the empire's 2nd and most powerful king. So this would have been a different daughter if Nabonidus had married a daughter. Nabonidus was, to his own apparent surprise, I already had that. That's a repeat. Throughout his reign, inscriptions and later sources suggest that Nabonidus worked to increase the status of the moon god Sin, which is a different god than the god that Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be honored. So this happened all the time with royalty, where their favorite god became the national god. Well, There's a lot of people that are like, no, we don't like that God. We want our God because we like all the perks we get when our God is in power. So we want our God to stay in power. So, the Mesopotamian pantheon extent with Nabonidus' devotion to sin led to religious reforms is debated. So don't know how much he accomplished. Next slide. Nabonidus was in self-imposed exile in Tama, Arabia, from 552 to 543. Reason for this is unknown, though it might have been due to disagreements with the Babylonian clergy and the oligarchy, the ones who wanted Nabu to stay in power, not sin, because they enjoyed the prestige. Belshazzar acted as regent in Babylonia during this period, while Nabonidus continued to be recognized as king. So where is this? Tama is located right there, and let me get I'll just point. Where you see Kuwait and Iraq, kind of in between there, that's where Babylon is. So that's where Belshazzar would have been, and Tama is clear on the other side of the Arabian desert. And that's where Nabonidus is hidden out. So Nabonidus is just like, I don't want to deal with all the stuff in Babylon. I'm just going to be king, and Belshazzar, he can take on and deal with all those crazy people back there. Nabonidus returned to Babylon. He escalated his religious efforts, rebuilt the Ekhulikul, the temple dedicated to Sin, the major northern city of Haran. Should ring a bell. That's where Abraham was, where he got the call from the Lord to go to the promised land. Nabonidus' reign came, which is a long ways away from Babylon, I might add. Nabonidus' reign came to an abrupt end with a quick victory over his empire by Cyrus the Great that we talked about earlier. Next slide. After this decisive battle of Opus, the Persians entered Babylon without a fight. Several sources state Nabonidus was captured, spared, possibly allowed to leave to the region of Carmania. He may have been alive in exile as late as the reign of Darius the Great. So, next slide. There's the Battle of Opus. Yeah, we already looked at that. Go ahead. Back to the commentary. Status of Belshazzar after Nabonidus' return is unclear. With respect to the fall of Babylon in 539, the Babylonian Chronicle refers to a battle at Opus on the bank of the Tigris River, and afterwards Sippar fell without a battle. That's a kind of a fortress town. Nabonidus fled, and the army of Cyprus entered the Babylon without opposition. Nabonidus was later captured. Next slide. According to Belarus, Cyrus spared his life, resettling him in Carmania, that is Nabonidus, a satrap of the Persian Empire near the Straits of Hormuz. Nothing certain is known about the fate of Belshazzar. Book of Daniel says somebody killed him that night. He just disappears from history. It all makes sense. So this Carmania, that's where they believe that Nabonidus probably was transported to deep in the Persian Empire. The Greek sources give a rather different account, suggesting Cyrus captured the city by deflecting the course of the Euphrates River and taking Babylon by surprise. This seems to be an embellishment. Oh, really? I mean, just rerouting the Euphrates River? Yeah, no big deal, right? Whatever. Go on. Herodotus says the Babylonians, listen to this, had a festival going on at the time, and they continued dancing and enjoying themselves until they learned the truth all too well. And what was the truth? Opus fell, Scipius fell, the Persians are at the gate, and the gate is open, and oh nuts. Sounds a lot like what Daniel is telling. Next one. Xenophon gives even a more highly covered account, having Cyrus attack when he had heard that a certain festival had come around Babylon, during which the Babylon was accustomed to drink and revel all night long. So those two historians agree. Next one. Xenophon's account, the king of Babylon is killed in a surprise attack on the palace where feasting was going on. That sounds a whole lot like the book of Daniel. This tradition appears to be reflected also in the Jewish description of Belshazzar's feast, meaning the book of Daniel. In either case, Patterns of similarity and difference among these accounts help one see how Daniel 5 participates in the creation of a cultural memory about the end of the Babylonian Empire and attempts to give the event religious significance. Next slide. This is a different commentary. Those commentators seeking to harmonize the biblical record of Daniel with ancient Near Eastern history opposed any number of possible identifications for Darius the Mede. Darius the Mede is mentioned in the book of Daniel, but he's not mentioned in history. So everybody's like, who is Darius the Mede? So they try figuring it out. Maybe it's Cyaxares II, whoever that is. Could be Cyrus himself. A lot of these guys had a whole bunch of names. Ugbar, Gubaru, Cambyses, Darius, and Darius II that came later. Could have been just some politician within Persia. Don't know. Must be admitted that none of those nominated is ever called Darius the Mede in existent literature from that time. For now, the identity of Darius the Mede remains a puzzle. In other words, we don't know. Das endeth the Geschichte. Lesson's over. Comments, question. I told you you're going to get way more Babylonian history than you really wanted. But what a wild ride. And what I love is these fragments of history, you pull them together, and they don't argue against the book of Daniel. I mean, maybe Darius the Mede, that part you go, huh? But what a bizarre story. And history tells almost the same story. Yeah, Mark.
Weren't the walls of Babylon huge?
Gigantic, thick, impenetrable.
How did they walk in?
The gates were wide open.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Imagine being a soldier and you have no leadership because they're all drunk in the king's palace. And the Persians show up. And you already know that they've defeated your army at Opus on the Tigris River. You don't have any defense in Babylon to hold out the Persians. They just give up. Yeah.
I thought there was a river that ran under the walls, and somebody went under the walls on the river and then opened the doors.
Well, that would fit with changing the direction of the Euphrates or something.
Right.
Could be an expression of that. I've not heard that. Interesting. Yeah.
And in the ESV you were using, it said that Darius was probably Cyrus.
Yeah, that's one of the possibilities. They say that Darius the Mede could be Cyrus. The Medes were kind of a subdivision or a region within the Persian Empire. So, anybody online have any questions or comments? Oh, fun stuff. So, chapter 6. Guess what happens in chapter 6? Lion's Den. Here we go. Probably one of the most famous stories out of the book of Daniel. We'll have fun. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise for the power of your word. And we just are amazed at your hand writing on the wall. And it all comes to fruition really, really quickly. We give you praise for the faithfulness of individuals like Daniel. And we pray that as your Holy Spirit speaks to us, that we also would be bold in expressing your will, your desire for people to repent of their sins and to be saved for not just now, but all of eternity. What a great message that you have given to us. We give you thanks and praise and honor in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen.